Right. The next civilization that we need to talk about in Europe is known as the Kievan Rus. Okay. But before we talk about that, we just kind of need to talk about Eastern Europe in general. Okay. The Slavic group that lives in Eastern Europe, which you can see here in these various colors, are known as the Slavs. Okay. So the Slavs are the people who live in modern day Poland, Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Slovakia, Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria. Okay, really kind of the only two countries that we're looking at that are in Eastern Europe today that don't really kind of fit the Slavic definition are Austria, the Czech Republic, Romania, Hungary, and Greece. Okay, and why they don't fit that Slavic definition, why they're kind of their own ethnic groups. We'll be talking about throughout this class. Okay, um, little is known about the ethnic origin of the Slavs. Okay, this is the issue we've talked a lot about in history. The further you go back in history, we just don't know. Okay, we really don't know how the people came to Europe. You know, we can go back and we think they originally were in modern day India, and then they migrated over to Europe. But the truth of it is, we just don't know. Okay. Um, However, when we're looking at these groups, they're hunter gatherers. Okay, so the majority of them are hunting and gathering. Okay, so we're going way back in history. Okay, and as time develops, keep in mind this region has very long winters, and they're on the steppe, the Russian steppe, where you have a lack of rainfall and you have a very tough soil that's very hard to plow. Okay, if you're asking what the Russian steppe is, okay, it's this everything in green here. Okay, this is basically the grasslands. Okay, in America we don't call it the steppe, we call it the Great Plains. In Africa, they don't call it the steppe, they call it the savannas, but it's basically that same type of kind of geography, physical geography there, where it's flat grasslands, lack of rain, and the soil is tough to plow. And since it has a lack of rain, it's often lacking in nutrients. Okay, so today with modern irrigation and modern fertilizers, we are able to farm these regions. Okay, but it is very intensive agriculture, okay, which means you're having to put a lot of input into it. Okay, so if we're going back in world history, this is not where they're going to be farming at all, okay, because it's very difficult to farm there. So you see, really, any group that is going to be on these plains are going to be nomads that are going to follow and hunt animals to kill and eat. Okay, and that's going to be an important continuity, right? That's the same with the Native Americans in the Great Plains. That's the same in the savannas with those various African tribes, and that's going to be the same with these Slavic groups in these regions. Okay, particularly more in the west here, because as we get further into what is modern day Russia, um, that is more Asiatic groups, Asian groups, um, which again is complicated. And when we talk about the formation of Russia, we're going to argue, is Russia really part of Europe or is it part of Asia? Okay, and we'll have that conversation, right? So you have all these Slavic groups in Eastern Europe here, okay? And you're going to have the Principality of Kiev, okay, that forms 860 AD and lasts till 1240 AD, okay? So one of the few civilizations in this class that we'll talk about in period one that only exists in period one in world history. Okay. Now you might have heard of Kiev in the news because today that is the capital of modern day Ukraine. You see it down here, right? And basically, what's going to happen is from Scandinavia up here, you're going to have these Swedish Vikings that are going to come, okay, and they're going to take their boats and they're going to sail them up these and down these various rivers that cut into modern day Russia and modern day Ukraine, right? The people um, in this region, these nomads, these Slavs, okay, they start calling them Rus, okay, which is Slavic for Swede, okay. So basically, we're kind of talking about the origins of modern day Russia, modern day Ukraine here, okay. And the city of Kiev becomes very important because it's going to be this trade center that is in between Constantinople and Scandinavia. Okay, so it has a river that cuts through it that dumps out onto the Black Sea. So that is easy access to Constantinople, which is further down here uh, off the map. So they can take the Black Sea up to Kiev, and then from Kiev, they can take these other various rivers to Scandinavia. Okay. So it's this important center between this really big city, Constantinople, and then these other small civilizations of Viking groups up here that are sailing around Europe. And we're going to be talking about those in a slide here. Okay. Um, Basically, what happens is um, the the prince of Kiev. That's what a principality is. Okay, it's a prince that rules the surrounding area, and he basically has to decide what religion he wants his people to convert to. And because they're in the east, and because Constantinople is Eastern Orthodox, he adopts the Eastern Orthodox religion. Okay, so you will have a patriarch of Kiev that comes into existence. That will lead those religious people in that belief, and we really see that um, Kiev and the Byzantine Empire are going to be culturally linked. Okay, now I've used some of these terms in class before, but we really need to make sure that we know them. Okay, the first term that we need to make sure that we know is a cultural trait. Okay, a cultural trait is anything. Any trait of a culture, you're going to be like, no, duh. Okay, so what is a cultural trait of Christianity? That would be the cross. That could be stained glass windows of Jesus. That could be that in Catholic Church they kneel when they pray. That could be the rosary. Those are all physical representations or cultural traits. But you also have non-physical cultural traits, like the belief in the Holy Trinity, right? Um, or the belief in Mary's divine conception. Those are all things that you can't see, but are cultural aspects. Okay, and cultural traits will diffuse. Okay, diffuse or cultural diffusion is just a fancy way of saying they move. Okay, they diffuse across space. Okay, so they move and they go to other civilizations, other places of the world. So we already looked at Islam diffusing across the Middle East. That just means it spreads. Diffuse is just a fancy word we use here. Okay, so what diffuses from the Byzantine Empire to Kiev? The first is the Greek alphabet. Okay, in Kiev during this time period, they used the Greek alphabet. Okay. The other one is the art and architecture, right? So if the Byzantine Empire is using Roman architecture, like the arch and the dome, we're going to see that be used in Kiev as well. And then the last one is what we're going to call that the quote unquote habit of mind. Okay, now that's not literal, but we're basically saying all the issues that the Byzantine Empire have with their governance, we'll see the same here. Okay, the first is autocracy. Okay, that's a word we've thrown around. The Principality of Kiev will be autocratic. Okay, which basically means the Prince of Kiev is the single guy that makes all decisions for his principality, his area surrounding Kiev, his little kingdom. Okay. Um, the other aspect of this is a lot of deceit. Okay. Again, continuity with the Byzantine Empire that they get from Rome. So we're seeing that come through, right? Well, if we're really upset with the um the prince, why don't we just kill him and replace him, right? So you're going to see that happen here. Okay. Again, these autocrats in the Byzantine Empire, in these kings in Western Europe, okay, these rulers with all the power, how are they defining or how are they legitimizing their rule? It's the divine right of kings, okay, and that just means they are telling their subjects that they have been selected by God to rule on their behalf, okay. So the Kievan Rus here, or also known as the Principality of Kiev, is very important because what we're going to see is this is a link between the Byzantine Empire Kiev to Scandinavia up here, but we're also going to see it's this going to serve as this link between the Byzantine Empire, the Principality of Kiev, and then all of these other principalities across modern day Russia. And we're going to see that it's going to serve as this conduit of cultural diffusion into modern day Russia in itself. Okay, so it's a very important link to diffuse this Eastern Orthodox religion and this Byzantine culture that we're going to see play into effect here later in this course when we actually finally start talking about how Russia comes into existence.